Hello, on behalf of the Saskatoon Industry-Education Council, I welcome you to our Career Pathways panel. I want to thank RVC Future Launch for helping to power our Spotlight on Careers event. As we gather here today, we acknowledge we are on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We welcome students, parents, and teachers from across Saskatchewan joining us. As a registered nonprofit organization, the SIEC works in partnership with 3 school divisions, the Saskatoon Tribal Council, community-based organizations, government agencies, and employers to help nurture the workforce of tomorrow. Last year, the SIEC worked with over 30,000 youth, over 3,300 business and post-secondary representatives, and more than 450 educators and career practitioners. At the SIEC, we host over 40 events and programs every year, including our Skills Boot Camps, which provide students with hands-on experience in various careers. Our Spotlight on Careers, which is a series of targeted events that provide students with experiential learning. Connected, a women mentorship program connecting females in grades 10 to 12 with mentors from a wide variety of sectors in Saskatoon. And the Summer Youth Internship Program, a 6-week paid internship where students gain work experience in construction, manufacturing, automotive, and culinary industries. And the students have the opportunity to earn competitive wages as well as high school credits throughout the summer. So be sure to visit our website, saskatooniec.ca, or follow us on our socials to stay up to date. And if you're not sure what you want to do after high school, we highly recommend attending a few of our events to discover what's involved in various career options. So throughout our event tonight, please utilize the Q&A function and enter any questions you may have for the panelists in the Q&A. If you have a question for a particular panelist, you can address it to whoever you'd like to answer. But if you just have a question in general, then feel free to enter it and our panelists will answer those questions later on in the evening. So we are going to get started with our first panelist of the evening. So Claudia Lintott's journey into the childcare sector came about through happenstance. While deciding whether or not to travel overseas when she earned her Bachelor's of Arts in English, a friend who worked at the Royal West Early Learning Early Learning Center suggested Claudia apply at the center. She began a 13-year career in early learning and childcare. Claudia started at the center as an EA and then worked as a preschool educator, inclusion coordinator, and assistant director before finally accepting the position of center director. Claudia's direct work with the children led to significant experience in supporting children with high behavioral needs, which became a passion. When Claudia made the decision to stay at Royal West, she dove into the early learning and childcare program and earned her diploma studying part-time. Claudia has a significant love for learning. In addition to enrolling in classes, has attended many hours of professional development events. Claudia is currently undertaking a Bachelor of Early Childhood Studies from Ryerson University to further her early learning and childcare knowledge. And outside of the realm of childcare, Claudia takes pride in being a mother to an 8-year-old and a foster mother to little ones who need care. And every once in a while, when the children are asleep and the assignment deadlines are far enough away, she's been known to dabble in baking. Most recently, Claudia accepted a position as a community program consultant with the Ministry of Education Early Years branch. So please welcome Claudia.
Hello, everyone. As I heard Michelle read my bio, I realized that maybe I put pretty much the whole story in that little snippet, but I can still speak a little bit more to the journey. So as Michelle mentioned, I really did sort of fall into this field. I had planned to either go abroad and teach English overseas or to take my first bachelor's degree and to go into education to teach in elementary. But once I started working in childcare, I really did fall in love. The children and the work were so fulfilling that I started in April, and by that September, I was enrolled in the Early Learning and Childcare program, I took my certificate, so to be a level 2 ECE through Sask Polytechnic, and the classes were correspondence. So it was, I would pick up the package and I would submit my assignments, and it was all done at my own pace, I guess, with some hard deadlines. And then I decided that I wanted a sort of a different educational experience. So I moved over to Lakeland College to complete my diploma because their classes were on online format. So there was more firm start and end dates for semesters. There was no overlap. And so I did that. One thing that I really appreciated about doing my education as I was working was that I felt that it really helped me to take the theory and the practice and to bring them both together. I felt that that really helped to cement some of the learning that I was doing, but also to justify some of the practices that I was engaging in the center with the kids. And then once I completed my diploma, I actually completed it just a few months before becoming director of the center. And then, then I became director. So while I was working on the floor directly with the kids, what I loved the most was watching them grow. My sort of speciality or my focus was with preschoolers. So most of my career was working with children 30 months, which is 2.5 and older. And just watching the learning happen, hearing their thoughts and their ideas, they just have such a special way of thinking when they're that little. And so building relationships was really important to me as an educator. And then I found out it's actually really important to be able to engage with children. So that was probably my biggest focus, was building relationships before I could engage in the actual learning, right? And in ECE, we talk about how children learn through play. So we did a lot of play, but there's a lot of ways to break down play experiences to ensure that you're still meeting all of the children's developmental milestones, and so that they're growing in every area of development. And it became really fun from an academic perspective to tie in what looked like a simple activity to the learning processes that were taking place. So, 2 little ones building a block castle together, the way that you could tie that to their physical development in terms of the gross motor and the fine motor skills taking place, the way that you could tie that to their cognitive development by looking at the problem solving that was happening, the placement of their blocks, the way that you could tie that into their social emotional development. You have 2 little ones sharing resources and sharing spaces and working collaboratively. So that just became like a fun part of the job, being able to tie those 2 things together. About halfway through my floor career, I became the inclusion coordinator at Royal West, and that meant that my job was to support the educators in identifying any children who had higher needs than was typical, and then working with professionals, behavior consultation services, speech language therapists that would come into the center and to support us supporting the little ones. So I would help to break down learning goals and turn them into achievable sort of, I guess, goals for the educators to work on with the children. And I would support on the floor as well at tricky times like transition times when the kids are moving from one activity to another. Some of the struggles along the way, I seem to always gravitate towards the children that needed more. And that was both good and bad, right? I felt that it really helped me to find meaning in the work. And at the end of the day, it could also be a little bit exhausting when you're with a little one who, you know, has melted down all day, or who you are trying to support in moving away from hitting other children to using their words. And also sometimes I would get frustrated when those little ones didn't get as much attention from other educators because they were looked at as difficult. So that's one thing that I really tried to support other educators in. You know, there's always a positive for every child, for every human, and we just need to find those positives and find a way to engage with the child that we can bring those positives out. So that really became, even as a director, once I had left the floor, it was very much how can we find the positives and what do the educators need in order to be able to support the little ones with those challenging behaviors. My work on the floor with the families that we served was also what led me into being a foster parent. So when my husband and I got married in 2015, we started the process pretty much right away thereafter. And I really do feel like I was, you know, inspired by the work that we do at Royal West and the families that we serve there. A day in the life of an educator, it can be wildly different from one day to the next, but overall you're doing a lot of the same things. So you are planning activities, you are observing the children to look for what they're interested in so that you can plan those activities based on those interests. You're observing to see, you know, where are they in terms of their development, but one day might look like, you know, today we spent all day outside digging in the sandbox and playing in water, and the next day it might be going on a field trip to the library. Although with COVID, field trips kind of went out the window, but hopefully we can get back to that soon. And then once I became a director, my focus was on supporting staff and supporting families more directly. So the role of a director is very multifaceted, and I did that for 6 years. And it can definitely be all-consuming if you're the type of person who, you know, wears their heart on their sleeve and really feels for all of the children and the educators and the families. And that can also vary very wildly from one day to the next, but it was also a very rewarding 6 years doing that. And then with that, I did decide that, you know, I needed to put my family more at the forefront rather than my career. So I decided then that I needed to find something where it was easier to do, to have a better work-life balance. So that's why I decided to move on from Royal West. But again, children have always kind of been a part of my life. So when I was a teenager, it was babysitting. When I was an ECE, it was still, you know, sometimes taking children home with permission of parents, of course, then as a foster parent, and now as a parent. So one thing that I want to make sure that everyone knows is that there are tuition reimbursement grants that are offered from the Ministry of Education Early Years branch. So that can really help to offset the cost of your tuition. And now there are federal grants as well. So, you know, you can get a lot of your education paid for through grants if you want to be an ECE. And that's me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Claudia, and sharing your story with us. And your passion for children is very evident in the way you speak. I loved what you said, that every day you're doing the same thing, but no days look the same. So I think that's very true in a lot of areas of education. And there is one question for you in the Q&A, so we'll just address that right now. So someone asked, what challenges have you experienced when working with such young children during the pandemic?
Oh, so that's a really good question. You know, with the pandemic, a lot of the restrictions that came down for childcare centers were things that really went against a lot of what we know to be best practice. So, you know, working with infants, with toddlers, even with preschoolers, that close physical contact is so important for developing those relationships and helping them to feel secure and safe in your space. But we were supposed to try as much as possible to limit close physical contact. You know, with our youngest, wearing face masks, they can't see your mouth, right? So in terms of speech and language development, they're not watching the way that your mouth moves as you're talking to them. And that's one thing that we've all been kind of curious across the sector to see, you know, if any research will be done on speech and language development in infants who were born just prior to the pandemic, to see how, you know, mask wearing has affected them. And then, of course, having to send home a child with symptoms of illness, that was very difficult because for a long time, it was absolutely no symptoms of illness were allowed in the center. So we'd have to call parents week after week because their child had a, you know, just a runny nose. And pre-pandemic, that was fine. But, you know, then we understood like just a runny nose can be a symptom of COVID. So we can't really take that risk, which was hard for educators and families alike.
All right, well, thank you so much. And if anyone does have any other questions for Claudia, be sure to put them in the Q&A and we can answer them later on. So we are going to move on with our next panelist. So up next, we have Melanie Summick, and she is an elementary educational assistant, or EA, with Saskatoon Public Schools. She spent 6 years as an EA with Prairie Spirit School Division, working in Asquith, before making the move to Saskatoon. She has a certificate in Early Childhood Education from Saskatchewan Polytechnic, and Melanie lives in Saskatoon with her partner, Chad, and 2 teenage daughters, Jenna and Logan. And she loves spending time at the lake with her family and friends. So please welcome Melanie.
Good evening, everyone. As Michelle mentioned, I'm an educational assistant with Saskatoon Public Schools. I am currently employed at Prince Philip School, and I work in a grade 2 classroom with a student with autism. However, I didn't start my career as an EA. I actually started as a lab and x-ray technician, which I really enjoyed at the time. I worked in Meadow Lake, Coaldale, Alberta, and then Saskatoon before getting married and having children. After I had my kids, I was a stay-at-home mom for 6 years. When my youngest started pre-K, I was getting antsy to go back to work, but I knew I didn't want to go back to x-ray. I wanted something where I could be home for my kids after school because my husband at the time traveled a lot for work and wasn't home much. I was at the school one evening for a family event, and I was telling the principal of my desires to go back to work. She told me I would make a great EA and that I should apply to be a substitute. I took her up on her advice and I sent in an application to Prairie Spirit School Division and was hired right away. I began picking up multiple days a week at my kids' school, Lord Asquith, and I was loving it. Shortly after starting, I was offered a temporary part-time contract in my daughter's pre-K class. I was ecstatic, and so was she. My contract was 4 mornings a week, plus I subbed in the afternoons. I got to go to school every day with my kids and work in both their classes. I continued working there for 6 years and was so happy to be involved in their school days. However, I was always working on temporary contracts, meaning at the end of June, my job was done and I had to wait till the fall to see if there was another job opening. It was stressful to say the least, not knowing if I would have a job or not the next school year. So when my husband and I split up and I moved to Saskatoon, I decided I needed to find something more permanent and stable so I could support myself and my children and not have the added stress every June of whether or not I would have a job. I applied for a substitute EA position with Saskatoon Public Schools, but because I hadn't taken any post-secondary classes in the field, I wasn't hired. so I decided to go back to school and get a certificate so I could continue on my career path. Working in pre-K sparked a passion for early childhood education that I never knew I had. I got to learn alongside children every day, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I did my research and I decided to take early childhood education program at Sask Polytechnic. It was a one-year course as opposed to the 2-year EA course. Being a single mom with a mortgage, I couldn't afford to take 2 years of school and not have an income coming in. Plus, taking the ECE course would open up more doors for me as well. Not only would I be able to EA, but I could work at a daycare center or early learning centers as well, which I did. During my course, I had to do 2 hands-on practicums. I did one in a pre-K classroom and one in an early learning center. I had to plan lessons, field trips, observe students' interests, document their learning, and I was able to build wonderful, trusting relationships with the children and their families. I was placed at the Saskatoon Early Childhood Demonstration Center for my first practicum and Carolyn Robbins pre-K for my second. After completing both practicums, I knew I preferred to be in a classroom rather than a daycare center. I enjoyed both and I learned a lot from both, but the classroom was where I wanted to be. When my course was almost complete, I was approached by the director at the Early Learning Center at the Demo Center, who wanted me to work there. She was on maternity leave when I had done my practicum there, but had heard many great things about me and wanted me to work for a summer position. I felt extreme honor that someone who had never met me wanted me to work for her. I was also excited to be working with all the young children I had grown so close to during my practicum. I accepted the position, and soon after starting, a one-on-one position opened up with a child with behavior issues, and I was moved into that role. She was a 5-year-old foster child who suffered from severe trauma. She had a hard time following the rules and would throw tantrums, kick, scream, hit, spit, and more, especially when she didn't get her way. By far, she was one of the hardest children I've had to work with. After the first 3 days, I went into the director's office in tears and told her I couldn't do it anymore and was giving my 2 weeks notice. I couldn't go home from work each day in tears and exhausted from having to chase her around the room and hold her down when she was having one of her tantrums. Each day was the same, having to follow her around to make sure she didn't harm herself or any of the other children. It was exhausting. I spent the weekend thinking about her more and more, wondering if I could handle her every day. Did I really want to be punched, kicked, and spit on daily? No. I've been through that already with other students. Did I want to be afraid? Did I want to go home crying every night? No. But then I changed my thinking. I thought of what she needed rather than myself. She needed a constant person in her life who she could trust and rely on. I went back to work on Monday with a different view on what my days would be like. They would no longer be following her around and waiting for the next tantrum, but rather guiding her in a more positive way and showing her how to positively interact with other children. Things were very slow at first, but eventually we built a strong relationship where she trusted me and would listen. The tantrums lessened and she was behaving so much better. I continued working with her through the summer on a full-time basis. I was also contacted by Saskatoon Public Schools that summer to come in for an interview for a substitute position. My interview went extremely well, and I was told that I would have a contract in no time. When September came, she started kindergarten, so she was only at the center every other day, which meant I was only at the center those days as well. On my off days, I was subbing at multiple different schools, so I was working full-time, which was great. In December, I got offered a 3-week subbing position at Evan Hardy, which I could not turn down. The hours worked better with my kids' schedule, and I was getting paid more subbing than I was at the center. My boss at the center understood why I had to take it and was sad to see me leave. It was great to be back in a classroom again, even if it was high school. On my last day of that job, I got a call from HR asking me if I would fill a subbing position at Prince Philip for the month of January. I was happy to accept and couldn't wait to be back in an elementary school. January came and I started at Prince Philip. After my first day, I knew I wanted to stay there. It is a small school of just over 200 kids, and the staff was small and all very supportive of one another. When my subbing contract was up at the end of January, I was offered a contract until the end of June. Fortunately, that June, I was offered a permanent contract and was excited to be able to stay at Prince Philip. Since being there, I have worked in grades 1, 5, a 7-8 split, and currently grade 2. As I mentioned earlier, I am one-on-one with a student with autism. He is a very intelligent child, but lacks social skills and independence. I worked with this student last year in grade 1, and needless to say, he had a tough first part of the year. Going from half-day kindergarten to schools being closed to all-day, everyday grade 1, that was a lot for any child, let alone a child with autism. It was a struggle, but we encouraged him every day to do his best and to be his best. My workday is spent building relationships with my student as well as other students in the classroom. I may be one-on-one, but I'm there to also support anyone else who needs it. The students know they can always come to me for help, as does the classroom teacher. The classroom teacher and I have a great working relationship. She relies on me to help answer parent emails if issues arise, give feedback on how kids are doing, and help out wherever else is needed. We have a great partnership, and that is one of the most wonderful things about my job, building relationships. My job is to support students in their educational needs and help them progress successfully. How I do that is I alter the teacher's lessons to more suit the learning styles of the student or students I'm working with. Not only does my job involve academics, but it also involves behavior management, and up to just a few months ago, it consisted of personal care as well. It takes great organizational and communication skills to be a successful EA. You also need to be flexible as an EA. Every teacher is different, and their learning and teaching styles are different, and they run their classrooms differently. So you need to be able to adapt to whoever you are working with. Some challenges that I face from time to time include emotional exhaustion. Some days I go home upset because my student was having a hard day, crying, upset, and not willing to participate or listen. Sometimes the children have a lot of personal problems going on at home, and I tend to take that home with me and worry about them. Frustration. Frustration arises when I don't see my student progressing as I had hoped, or he starts progressing and then regresses. I feel like I have failed him sometimes. It can also take a long time to build up someone's trust when you first begin working with them. Having a trusting relationship will make the day so much easier. When I first started with this student last time, it took me until Christmas time to build up a good trusting relationship with him. Now I can just look at him if he's doing something wrong and he knows to stop, but it takes time, so you have to be patient. I became an EA because I find it extremely rewarding. I think the rewards of this job far outweigh the challenges. I love to help people, and I love to see people succeed. I love knowing that I had a hand in a child developing lifelong skills. While watching children figure things out for themselves using the tips I have given them brings me great joy. This quote by Bob Marley reminds me of my passion for this job. Love the life you live the life you love. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Melanie, and sharing your story with us. Your story is one that we love for students to hear all the time about you changing your path and understanding that that's okay. And sometimes you had a career as a lab tech that you loved, but then your life changed and your needs changed, and now you found another career path that's just as fulfilling, but in a different way. And so it's always good for students to hear that, because I know so many of us have been told you pick a career and you stick with that career for the rest of your life. So, so it's good for them to hear that story, and it's very evident your passion for the children you work with. So thank you so much. And once again, if anyone has questions for Melanie, then you can throw them in the Q&A. And we are going to move on to our third panelist. So up next, we have Paul McTavish. He has spent his career as an educator in Prairie Spirit School Division, during which time he has served as a teacher, vice principal, and now as a coordinator of learning. During that time, he's had the privilege of working in 6 different communities, ranging from small towns to urban centers. In addition to being an educator, Paul has spent much of his free time coaching, mainly in the areas of basketball and baseball, which now mainly involves his children. And there are many opportunities to coach his children, as Paul and his wife are parents to 5 young and energetic children. Paul also enjoys the opportunity to hike and camp with family and friends. So please welcome Paul.
Thanks, Michelle. First off, I got to say, I haven't seen Melanie in a long time, but I'm super excited about the amount of Ask With people on this panel. So that's awesome. And I guess that's where I'll start. There's kind of 2 things I'm going to share here. One is kind of like my path to where I ended up now and just some observations on that. So I'm a farm kid from Asquith. I graduated in 1997 from Lord Asquith School. And when I did, there was these new things called computers, and there was this crazy thing called the internet that people were talking about. So when I graduated, I decided to go into computer science at the University of Saskatchewan. And I got there and quickly found out it was not for me. And if you are into computers, that is fantastic, like more power to you. But I got there and I got into a room with no windows and just a bunch of computers. And if you missed one semicolon, your whole thing didn't work. And I was like, this is not for me. So I transferred over to kinesiology quickly after that because I was big into sports. And once I got there, I actually got the opportunity to transfer to a different college. So I graduated from Jamestown College in North Dakota. And the reason that I went there was I went to go play baseball, actually. When I was in kinesiology at the U of S, I kind of thought like, oh, this is fun. I come from a family of educators. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a teacher for a short time before he took over kind of the family farm. And I bucked that trend for as long as I could. I was like, no, I'm definitely not going into education. But when I went down to Jamestown, they didn't have athletic therapy like I thought maybe I was interested in. So I did get my education degree. But I did not enter education with a burning passion to help children by any stretch of the imagination. I went because I like sports and I wanted to coach sports. And through time, I have totally shifted. Like I still coach a lot, but through time, I have shifted that perspective. And I think education, it does so much good in the world for so many people and so many kids. But just that is not where I started from, I guess. Where I did start, though, I started teaching at Delisle Composite School. I got my first contract there, and that was on a mat leave, and then a couple mat leaves there, and then I ended up at Purdue School, about I don't know, 15 minutes from where I grew up on the farm. And I taught there for 2.5 years. When I graduated, I was a phys ed major with an ELA minor, but I started doing like senior science and things like that because it's just like that's what was needed at the school. And then from Purdue School, I went to Hague High and I taught there for a year. Like I said, mainly science classes, some phys ed, that kind of stuff. It gave me the opportunity to coach basketball. It gave me the opportunity to coach some volleyball, a little bit of football, that kind of stuff too. From there, I got the opportunity to go to Clavette Composite School as the vice principal. So I still taught about 50% at some points, 30% other points kind of thing. But I still got to teach a little bit. I got to coach basketball there, and I was there for about 7 years. And out of all the position shifts that I've had between like one role to another, the biggest shift was that shift from moving from a teacher to a vice principal. And I'll get more into that later, but the gist was kind of like, when I was a teacher, if there was a problem in my classroom, I probably created it. It was probably something that I did, and I could go and say, hey, I'm sorry about that, or let's talk this out and try and figure out what the deal is. When you get into administration, you're dealing with issues that you didn't create. And so having the ability to communicate or to help other people communicate is largely that skill set, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. This was also the point where I got my master's degree. So as far as education goes, I needed the Bachelor of Education degree to get into becoming a teacher. In our school division, though, you can move into an administration position before you get your master's. I think there's lots of other school divisions where that would not be the case, but that's what it was in my time. And I think that was actually fairly beneficial because when I was taking my master's, everything that I was learning in class was happening. Like if we were talking about something in class on Wednesday, it happened probably Tuesday. So there was lots of examples and connections I could make, which was great. So after being in Clonsey for 7 years, after being in Clavette for 7 years, I moved to Clonsey as the principal. Clonsey is a smaller school. When I was there, about 116 kids, K to 12, lovely, lovely community. I loved it there. I taught about 50% there, and I was that was kind of the gist there. So still lots of teaching. And then from there, I moved to become the principal of Martinsville High. So a grade 9 to 12 school, about 560-ish kids when I was there. And I was there for 3 years, very little teaching at that point, but I was coaching basketball there, which is something that I'm pretty passionate about, like I said. And now I've moved the last 2 years. I'm a coordinator with Prairie Spirit School Divisions or School Division. I have a number of things I do in my portfolio, none of which are going to super interest you, but things like extra career work exploration, home-based ed, driver's ed, SECs assessment, just a whole mixed bag of stuff. But mainly my job is about supporting administrators and teachers so that they can support students. And this is where I'm going to switch over from kind of the chronology of what I've done to kind of some of the observations I want to make. So education is all about supporting people. It is about helping people take their next step, whatever that might be. So as Melanie was just sharing, like the role, and this is going to be super simplistic, there's way more nuance to this, but the role of EA is to support some individual students or maybe a couple of targeted students with some needs they have and like help build them up and help figure out what their next steps are. And of course, they're going to walk alongside families as they do that, but it's about specific kids, whereas teachers are going to take classes of kids and they're going to support those students and those families. So I'm not going to talk about that role a whole bunch because I think Lane's going to share more about the teacher part, but the administrator role then is kind of that next level up where it's like your job is to support teachers largely. You'll still support students and families, of course, but like if you can support the teachers, they can support the kids and then everything works. So that's what I always viewed my job is as an administrator, was to support teachers primarily. And there's, of course, there's other parts that come with that too, like I said. But at every level, it's about identifying like who needs support and like who is in the position to do that. So when you think about students and you think about families, teachers can support those students and families, EAs can support those students and families, but who supports those people? So that's why the administrator, I think the primary role is supporting your staff that you have. And then my job now is to support administrators so that they get what they need so they can support teachers and on down the line. So more often than not, when I was a principal, like I would come home and one of my kids would be like, what did you do today? And I'd have to think like, what did I do today? Because every day it was so different. There were so many little goofy things that happened. A lot of it, honestly, was walking through bathrooms, checking what was going on in there. Like way more of administration is walking through bathrooms than they advertise, for sure. But there's more than that. So some of the things that come up. So one thing that comes up that only you as the principal or the vice principal or kind of your admin team do is scheduling. So that's one of the things where it's like, if you like puzzles, if you like trying to fit things together, like the scheduling part, it might be your jam. And that scheduling is all about putting people in the situations where they can use their strengths. So putting your staff in the situation where they can use their strengths and marrying that with what kiddos need. So ensuring that students get the educational opportunities, one, that they need, so making sure like they get their grad requirements and that type of thing. And then two, that they want. So maybe there's something you can provide to them. And which is why the SIEC, they didn't ask me to say this, but the SIEC is fantastic because they provide so many of the opportunities maybe we can't as in some of our bricks and mortar schools, I guess. The thing that everybody thinks principals deal with is dealing with conflict, and we do, but they'll say like, do you deal with the bad kids? And I always say, no, I don't deal with the bad kids. I deal with people who made mistakes. So people that mess something up that they wish they could do better, and we try and figure that out. I guess the thing about like conflict is anytime you bring people together, there's lots of great things that happen, but you're going to get conflict as well. And so you have to have somebody to help deal with that. And the biggest skill for dealing with conflict is being able to communicate, partly you being able to communicate, but more helping other people communicate to others. The best work you can do is like help people like talk to each other and sort it out. And if you have that skill, like that is one of the biggest skills you have to have, I think, as a principal. And largely that is about like letting people be heard and helping them get the language they need to get their point across. And sometimes they're so mad that takes a long time, but that's kind of the work. And that's part of what's nice about administration is, as a classroom teacher, if some kid is like super frustrated, it's really hard to leave your class to devote your time to that kid until they can cool down and figure it out. In administration, you have a little bit more time. So that's one of the benefits of it. Another big thing you got to deal with as a principal, money management. So every school has a budget and you have to marry two things. You have to know what the rules are for how you can spend that stuff, and you have to align that with the principles you hold. So what are the things you really value and how can you use money to remove barriers or move things forward so you get what you value? And how do you do that in a way where you don't screw up? Because if you mess up the money part, you can get in big trouble. Another big thing is working with staff. So leading professional development or leading kind of the PD parts that people need. And the other part I think about working with staff is like coming to decisions as a group. So there's like a collective vision, or there's a collective direction we're all pulling, and that kind of stuff, and ensuring everybody's on the same page, I guess. And then there's just a bunch of other stuff that you wouldn't think is just weird stuff. So like working with the community, making sure that like gym bookings and usage, that becomes your thing. School resource officer, so like an RCMP, if they're coming in and they want to like support your school, you're the first liaison with them. Drama productions, community drama productions that want to use the stage or the gym or whatever, minor hockey officials clinics, all those things, all these weird things that just come up that you're the one that deals with it. Testing from the government where they're like, hey, we want to do a PISA test, that's, you got to figure that out. And then there's just other just weird stuff, like if there's a bat in the foyer that's flying around, somebody's going to call you for sure, or the furnace goes down, or a bus is late, or a teacher came to work but they're sick and now they need to go home, or there's someone vaping in the bathroom, or some kid is leaving and they're supposed to write an exam but their family's going on a trip, and how are we dealing with that? Or things like, if you're a 16-year-old, can you stop your parents from looking at the report card? All the things that are just like weird things end up on your desk. And most of the time when you're there, you think like, okay, so I have a bachelor's degree in education. What qualifies me to sort this, to like answer this question? And lots of the times it's like, as a principal, you have to get really comfortable with saying like, I don't know the answer to this, but I will do the work to find out. I will connect with the people I need to that will have this answer, and we will come to a good resolution. But most of the time it's about telling people like, we're like, hey, I got you. I'm going to support you in this. It's going to be okay. But like, I don't have the answer right now. And so that, I think that's kind of where I want to wrap up with, like, this whole job, like this whole system of education is about supporting people, and the principal's job is about like supporting the people in your school, specifically your staff, sometimes like kids who are struggling, those types of things. And that's what's challenging about it, and that's what's ultimately fun about the work. So it's challenging because there are lots of competing interests. Typically there are lots of ways you could navigate where you're going to go as a school, or you can figure out like how you're going to use your money, or how you're going to use your staff, or things like that. So there's many different possible outcomes, and trying to find things that satisfy people or make people feel fulfilled, that's the challenging part. But it's also fun because when you do that work and you treat people with respect and you listen to them and you help solve problems, like the thanks you get is pretty, like, it's pretty rewarding and pretty fulfilling. You won't get, like, as a classroom teacher, when Christmas comes, you get all kinds of Tim Hortons gift cards and you get all kinds of chocolates and little crafts and stuff like that, which is wonderful. You don't get that as the principal, so you're totally going to lose out on that. But you do get a lot of thanks and appreciation from staff and parents and adults, which is pretty rewarding work. So yeah, that's kind of my quick overview of what it's like in administration. I am more than happy to answer questions, but yeah, that's kind of my blurb.
Thank you so much for joining us, Paul. Whenever people are speaking, I always write down some notes, and I have some very random notes written down for you. When you said your portfolio wasn't very interesting, I was going to call you out because you do get to work with us. So.
That's true.
But then you redeemed yourself. I really appreciate you helping to explain what the role of the principal is, because I know for a lot of students, they don't always understand the principal is that person who sits in the big office. So it was really great for you to explain that. And I laughed when you talked about catching the bat, because during my internship, there was a bat in the computer room and I got the principal and he had to catch it.
Absolutely, yeah.
There was one question, and I think it was maybe just a bit of confusion around something you've said. So if you want to clarify,
Sure.
But someone said, if you as a vice principal deal with the kids who made a mistake, then does the principal deal with the bad kids, or is someone else entirely that deals with that? Yeah,
so I will clarify. So I would just say the kid isn't bad. I would say that people make, like, everybody makes mistakes. So if you're saying like bad kids and you want to categorize them as that, yeah, the vice principal would still deal with the bad kids, but I would prefer to say kids made mistakes. So would the principal. And when every school I've been in, it's just whoever happens to be available at that time will deal with the kid who needs the support and kind of stuff. So I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we are going to continue on with our next panelist. So next up, we have Lane Brickset. He is an educator currently working with Greater Saskatoon Catholic Schools at their all-virtual cyber school. Prior to his time with cyber school, Lane has spent time at Father Vachon, George Vanier Catholic Fine Arts School, and Bishop Roberecki. At these locations, Lane has spent his time working with grades 6 through 8 students and continues to love his job, meeting new families and working with amazing students daily. Although Lane says he loves teaching all subjects, he's extremely passionate about incorporating physical activity, place-based learning, and technology into the classroom. Aside from academics, Lane is actively involved with coaching in our community. He coaches everything from elementary level basketball to comedy clubs. Outside of school, Lane is also currently a member of the University of Saskatchewan Huskies football coaching staff and coordinates a 6-a-side football for elementary boys and girls with Saskatoon minor football. He is committed to giving back to the sport that's given him many opportunities to have his dream job. Lane knew he wanted to be a teacher by the time he got to high school. His love of teaching came from the amazing leadership of his past teachers and coaches. They ultimately dedicated their life to making him a better person. Now Lane feels as if his career choice is his opportunity to continue to help the next generation grow and develop like so many of his past mentors did for him. So please welcome Lane.
All right, thank you so much there, Michelle, and a special shout out to everybody watching and all the previous speakers. And Paul, I'm just so happy you clarified the principal's job. I just thought it was morning announcements, and then after that it was over, but I'm happy to know that there's a lot more. And thank you so much for Melanie and Claudia as well for some insight. And one of the reasons why I love being an educator, just because there's just so many different dynamics that come together to make a team work. So first of all, I do want to just thank the SIEC for inviting me to speak here today. I do feel honored to be able to brag a little bit about my dream job that I get to do on a daily basis. First of all, I want everyone just to reflect a little bit here about your time in elementary school, as I am an elementary school teacher. Like, I'm quite old, but I can remember all of my teachers. I can literally remember all of my teachers by names. Now, I might not remember everything that happened in those grades, but I've made connections with every single one of those teachers, not just to protect their privacy. I remember Mrs. D, Mrs. N, Mrs. B, Mrs. S, Mr. S, Mrs. HP, Mrs. S, okay, right through grade 8. And every single one of those teachers had an impact on me. I think about school and how school just resonates fun, okay, or it should resonate fun. And I know that there's not always every opportunity, right? You got to pull out your math textbook. Sometimes you got to do questions, 3 to 7 in the textbook. Maybe not the most exciting thing. But as an educator, we get an opportunity every single day to try to create learning and imaginative opportunities for students. And I'll circle all the way back to like grade 2, where I remember Mrs. B, having us as a class really opening my eyes, turning our classroom into an airplane. And all of us imagining that we were on this airplane and we were flying to Australia. She came around and she was dressed up like a stewardess, and she came around and she served us some, I think it was hot chocolate at the time, and maybe some snacks and things like this. And I think about how now as an educator, that was definitely not part of her job requirement. Okay, she could have given us a worksheet, but she wanted to create that learning opportunity. And all these years later, here I am still talking about that opportunity that we had. And, in part of the introduction that Michelle had mentioned to me, I really do think that based on all of these past teachers, that it is now my opportunity to go back and to create some, unique learning experiences for students to make them fascinated about education, continue to grow and learn daily. So, again, just resonating the whole fun idea, I challenge you to go into a school around the holidays. Just Valentine's Day yesterday, and I'm getting text messages from some of my colleagues in Saskatoon here that through surprise Valentine's dances for students, and just the excitement in the air around this, the excitement around holiday crafts or whatever it may be. You know, there's always something going on in a school that makes it so much fun. Now, when I look at creating these unique learning opportunities, I have to kind of reflect back on what got me into teaching. Why did I want to become a teacher, and how did I get to where I am today? Well, again, I mentioned some of these past teachers who've given me such great learning opportunities. Well, now, you know, we get to a point where I get to high school, and all of a sudden I start playing football. I get a chance to meet some of my teachers in a whole different light. Now I'm getting a chance to not only enjoy going to an academic math classroom, but now I'm actually getting coached a sport by one of my teachers as well. And I'm getting a chance to see them in a whole different light. And all of a sudden, you know, this teacher become coach all of a sudden inspires you to be you know, a better football player. Now you're developing your athletics. For me, it was football, and for many of you, it might be other things that you are growing and learning from your teachers. And with all of that, my progression, you know, went right through to grade 12, where I had one of my high school teachers push for me to play post-secondary football after high school, which led me into a path of getting some schooling, and by playing football. And by playing football and going to school, I knew that I had to get into coaching. I just loved being around young people that wanted to learn the game of football. I knew that I wanted to be back in school, so I'd go back with some of the football teams that I worked with, and I'd do some reading in some elementary schools and stuff like that. And to me, it was just finalized that this is something that I had to do for a career choice. Now, when I got into to teaching, I remember my first year, I remember thinking it was the most bizarre thing for me. Now, if you look at me, you can probably tell that I'm not like the most artsy person, but my first contract, they actually ended up putting me in a fine arts school. So George Vanier Catholic Fine Arts School here in Saskatoon. And if you know anything about the school, they do these extravagant plays and all sorts of stuff like that. And I remember thinking, like, you know, I don't know what our school division is thinking, but here they're putting, you know, this football coach in this fine arts school. And I remember a couple of the people that, you know, the principals and things like that were laughing that they were saying football guy in a fine arts school. I thought it was going to be its own musical in itself. But what I take from that situation was it challenged me to step outside of my comfort zone. And I learned as an adult early on in my teaching career that it's okay to not know all those answers, because we get into teamwork as teachers. You've heard the other speakers here today mention other people that they have worked with, the teams. And I grew up, you know, loving sports, playing sports, being passionate about sports to this day. And when you get into a school and you start working with a team of teachers, everybody has your back. Well, now it's not only a team of teachers, but now you also have, as a classroom teacher, a team of students that you are also working with. Together, you come up with great master plans and these great ideas, and everybody is there to support one another. You know, so if, you know, I go into this fine art school and maybe I'm looking for some drama ideas or different ways to incorporate art. Well, teachers want to help each other out. You know, you go talk to any teacher in an elementary school as a newer teacher, and you say, you know, do you have any suggestions for, you know, beginning this unit? Teachers will share resources with you. They want to see you be successful because ultimately they care about the kids of the school, and they know that if they help you out, you're going to help the kids out. And that's ultimately what it's about. We're here to help each other. Now, going back to the students are also a part of the team that you get to work with. You know, as a teacher, you know, we call our classroom the classroom family. And for us, it's all of us going together. All of us, you know, I heard the analogy today, pulling the rope in the same direction. And that's exactly what it is. We're all pulling the rope in the same direction. As soon as one of us falls off and stops pulling, or, you know, we have any tension, well, we have to address those issues, because we all have to work together. When one of us messes up, we all mess up. And we have to make sure that we're, you know, working together. So with that said, you know, you're working with a variety of different personalities. And as I believe it was Melanie had said, each day changes from day to day. So one day you might have a student who's upset maybe because you're not playing floor hockey in phys ed. And how do you change that? And how do you work with that? And how do you build those relationships to make sure that, a student isn't maybe upset or whatever the situation may be? So you have a team of teachers, you have a team of students, and then the last component of that is just kind of that team that you get to build with parents as well. One thing that I know Paul had mentioned as well, transparency. Ultimately, when you go into teaching and you're really doing it for all the right reasons, right? You're not doing it to get into the summer holidays. I know that, sometimes you hear jokes and things like that about those things. But if you're doing it for all the right reasons, every decision you make in the classroom, if you can honestly say that it is for helping somebody grow and to learn, parents are understanding, you're transparent, you communicate with parents via email, you open door policy. Families are great to work with. You can learn so much from families, and often one of the things that I'm beginning to find as we continue to grow, families want to be involved with the learning that's happening in the classroom. And that's something that as I continue to grow as an educator, I continue to lean on and utilize more of the supports that we have right in our very own classroom families. So, and then just going back to the opportunities that you can change your job on a daily basis. So for example, right now, I am an online school teacher, as Michelle has mentioned to everybody. But let's say that I get sick of my current job. Well, I can change up my job as a teacher. Maybe I want to see if I can become a release teacher where maybe I'm teaching mainly phys ed, science, and maybe art. Maybe I want to try and become a grade 1 teacher, respect to all those primary teachers. Maybe I want to try to work with grade 6s. Maybe I would like to learn how to be a learning assistance teacher. There's opportunities for you to move around a little bit, to find a niche that is more suitable to your gifts. And that's something that obviously your administration team, such as Paul or whoever your administrators are, would work with you to develop you into a place that would be suitable for you. The last thing I'm going to mention is just again, with me personally, I look at the opportunities I've had to the University of Saskatchewan Huskies and get some opportunities to work with some professional and semi-professional coaching opportunities. Those I know would not have come unless I would have become an educator, because by working with people on a daily basis, by learning how to communicate, by learning how to be transparent, you are given a gift that can carry on the rest of your life, whether that's, working an office job or dealing with family, whatever it may be. You learn to listen, you learn to appreciate people, you learn to be fair, you learn to be candid, and all those things are so valuable. And I know that for me personally, I am indebted to education, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this little speech here, to all those teachers that have worked with me, to all the coaches that I've had. I know that I'm going to continue to do everything that I can to give back to the students that I currently work with. And it's not about the personal praise that I need them to say thank you to me personally, but it's more so knowing that they've been given an opportunity to be as successful as they want to be for the rest of their lives. So a big thank you to all of you for the opportunity to speak for all of you. And of course, if anyone has any questions more about education, I'd be happy to address those when the time comes. So thank you so much, Michelle, and I will pause there.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us and sharing your story with us, Lane. My colleague was just messaging me and saying how energetic and lively you are. And it's great to see your energy. And you shared a lot of great things about teaching, about the collaborativeness that is involved in education. And I think that's something that's very important to know, is that as a teacher, you're not alone. There's other teachers there who are willing to help you and guide you. Your administrators are always there for that support. And I liked how you really highlighted the opportunity for change and finding your niche I never knew you had such a passion to be a grade 1 teacher, but good to know. I'm sure the division would love to hear that as well. But there are great opportunities available. Maybe if you do realize teaching a certain grade or subject area isn't what you're interested in, what is really motivating you, then there are always other opportunities available. So thank you. And once again, questions for Lane, you can throw those in the Q&A. So we are going to hear from our final panelist of the evening. Stacy Hanson is in her 27th year as an educator. She began her career as a physical education teacher and 10 years later moved into student services as a high school counselor. She obtained her social work degree in 2004 and spent the next 17 years counseling students with academic, career, and personal issues. Stacy has always been passionate about mental health and has become certified in mental health literacy, brain story, mental health first aid, violent threat assessment 1 and 2, applied suicide intervention, and has recently become certified in reconciliation through Indigenous education at UBC. Stacy's excited to be in a new role this year as a youth mental health education coordinator with the Saskatoon Industry-Education Council, as it allows her to support students, staff, and the broader community with new initiatives, education, and events that support mental health. So please welcome Stacy.
Thanks, Michelle. If I wasn't the oldest person on this panel and already in education, after hearing Lane talk, I would definitely be jumping into education. So way to make it sound super duper exciting, which it is. Certainly, I knew I wanted to be a teacher on my very first day of grade 9 because I fell in love with my phys ed teacher. I just thought she was the most amazing person in the world, and I wanted to be just like her after that. And that's kind of what set my career path on its track, because no one in my family is a teacher. I'm the only teacher in my family. I would say about grade 11, coaching became a piece of what I wanted to do as well. So I thought, what a better life than to be a teacher and a coach. And so I set off, I got my kin degree and education degree, and I went into teaching, and I was a phys ed teacher for 10 years, and I loved it. But around the 5-year mark, after I had a family, I started to realize that coaching, along with a full-time teaching job, was actually very, very time consuming. And I wasn't sure that I would be able to do that for a full 30 years. So I started thinking about other ways, as Lane said, in education, what other directions in education I could take. And so when I really sat down and thought about it, I realized that I wasn't super passionate about any other subject area other than phys ed. Like, I absolutely loved phys ed, but I was very passionate about students. Loved working with students, and actually as a coach, you did a lot of counseling with kids because you spend a lot of time with them, a lot of travel. And so I got to know students really well when I was coaching, and I thought, you know what, maybe I should go into counseling. I love that piece of my role. And so that's what I did. I started working on my social work degree part-time for the next 5 years. And so the reason I went social work, because at the time, there was no other career path to become a counselor. If you wanted to do a master's at that time in counseling, you had to actually take a 2-year leave in order to do that. And with having a young family, I wasn't able to do that at my time in my life. So I did social work because I was able to do it out of the off-campus, U of R off-campus at the U of S campus is how it worked, excuse me. Nowadays, it would be so much easier because there's so many online courses that you can do. As well, the University of Saskatchewan now offers an after-degree certificate that teachers can take to get their counseling certificate so that they can also move into counseling. Now, that's for high school counseling. Now, I also work for Saskatoon Public Schools, which is different than every other school division. Every school division kind of has their own qualifications for counseling. Saskatoon Public Schools, you have to be a teacher first in order to become a high school counselor. So I had my education degree, and then I got my social work degree, and then I moved into counseling, and I spent 17 years there and loved every minute of it. I loved being a teacher, and I loved being a counselor. I couldn't think of a better way to spend my life working than working with kids. I've really, really enjoyed it. what are some other things about counseling? Certainly very, very different roles. When I moved into counseling from teaching, I quickly realized that I missed the connection with lots of kids. So in counseling, you get to really know some kids really, really, really well, and then, but you miss out on the large group of kids. And so even though part of the reason I went into counseling was because I wasn't sure I could continue coaching long-term, I've coached for over 20 years of my career, because as soon as I stopped coaching, I realized that was the place that I made the best relationships and best connections with kids, and I really missed that. So I went back to coaching as well. I coach my own children, and I've coached at the high school level for over 20 years. And just like Lane, it's probably my favorite thing that I do. And if I could have been a professional coach, I think that that's probably where my career path would have taken me. If I lived in the States and I could get paid for that, that's totally the way I would have gone. But ultimately, that's not the way my career went. Yeah, and so the other thing about counseling that I love is that you're not tied to the time of day. Anyone that's in education knows that when you're a teacher, you almost know what minute of the day it is all the time. You always know the time because your day is planned around time. And it was really refreshing actually to move into counseling. And I would sometimes look up and be like, what period are we in right now? I have no idea what time of day it is. And that was a really neat thing that I enjoyed as well. If tomorrow someone came to me and said, we're going to have to move you back into the classroom, we just can't have counselors anymore, I would love to be back in the classroom as well. So I've really enjoyed my whole time in education. I'm not sure if there's anything else I need to share. I see that there's a couple questions, so I can answer those.
Yeah, we do have some questions. So someone asked, was it hard to be a counselor and deal with students' personal issues?
Yes, I've shed some tears for sure, but I've also really enjoyed working with students to help them help themselves. So I think that's the one thing as a high school counselor, we kind of consider ourselves more like elementary school teachers in that we're generalists. So we don't do therapy in high school counseling. So we would work on some personal issues, but anything that would be bigger and need more support, we would refer to outside supports so that the student is getting the more in-depth support that they need, the more professional support, because we also do a lot of scheduling, career counseling, advocating for students in classes. And so we do a little bit of everything in our role. It's not just personal counseling. Although I know in Prairie Spirit, they do have two separate kinds of counselors. They have personal counselors and then kind of your career school counselor. So it depends on what kind of a role you're looking for and what division you work for. But in Saskatoon Public Schools, we do a little bit of everything.
Great, well, thank you for sharing your story with us, Stacy. And I'm going to invite all of the panelists to come back on. We have some questions in the Q&A that I think a few of you might want a chance to answer or give an input to. So the first question was, what if you were shy? Is there a way you could still be a teacher? None of you seem shy.
Can I speak to that?
Yes.
I'm not shy, but I don't know how I ever got into teaching because I was petrified of public speaking. And I can remember my very first lesson as an intern, and I stared at the top of the wall the whole entire lesson, and I didn't even look in the eyes of not one student. So what I can tell you is that it just takes practice. You just have to do it, and once you get used to it, it gets easier and easier.
And just to jump on what Stacy's saying, as well, you know, the one thing that I've had a chance to work with now, one of my weaknesses is organization. Okay, if you ever see my real teaching desk, it can be chaotic at the end of the day. I got to take like an hour, make sure everything's all put away. But when you're working with a great team, you find others that can help bring you up. So if you're a little bit shy, maybe your strengths are an organization, we would be a good fit with each other. And I think that's something that's so valuable in education. We're all there working and pulling together.
I might add to that too. I think it's really important for students, regardless of their age, to see different personality types as well, right? Because maybe your students are more shy, and so then they'll feel safer in a classroom with an educator who's more on the shy end or more reserved end, right? We can't all be, you know, super outgoing and energetic, because sometimes for some students that might be more difficult. And we see that in the early years as well. Some of our quiet, reserved teachers seem to be able to draw the children to them, even though they are more reserved.
And I would just build on that too. Like, I guess the only thing I would say is that it's not really about like outgoing or shy. It's about confidence, and confidence comes through repetitions and being prepared. And so like, if you do the work to be prepared for your lessons and what all the situations you're going to face, and you just get that through reps, through doing it over and over and over again, you will find your way to teach. Like there are 1,000 different ways to do this and 1,000 different skill sets. And there are 1,000 different like awesome teachers that like, if you're interested in teaching, you can find a way to do it.
All right, so there is one more question, and I think this comes from Stacy and Lane both, and Paul as well, talking about their opportunities to coach. If you were not a coach, will that hurt you from getting a job as a teacher?
No, it was just my area of passion. There's all kinds of clubs. I would encourage you, if you're going into education, to take some extra cur, like take on some extra cur. You just get to know students in such a different way, and it's a great way to build relationships. And it makes you it makes the job easier, because once kids form relationships with you, they are much more apt to follow rules in the classroom. And but there's lots of different ways to get involved in a school. There's so many different opportunities.
Yeah, and just to add on to that as well, I think that many coaching opportunities, you know, you find your strengths and you can bring them into your school community, such as the comedy club that was brought in because there was a group of students that wanted to learn how to be stand-up comics. Well, nobody wanted to coach it. Well, I volunteered to coach it. Now, I'm not a stand-up comic, but you just sometimes put yourself out there and you find ways to do it. Now they say I have, oh, Mr. B, your dad jokes and whatever. But anyway, that's a whole different side of the story.
All right, well, thank you so much. That's it for the questions. I guess the last thing I just would like to wrap it up with is if you have any final words of wisdom for any students who are considering a career in any areas of education. And I once again want to thank you guys for the diversity that you've shown tonight. We have everyone from working with newborn babies up until that high school graduation, which is our ultimate goal for all of the students we work with, but also just working with them to make sure that they're happy and they're healthy and they are positive members of our community. So any last words about your career in education, or any words of wisdom for someone wanting to go into any areas of education?
I'll just say my last words here will be no amount of money, no amount of PlayStations, no amount of pizza will ever replace the feeling that you can get by helping somebody reach that aha moment and seeing them break through. And that's something that will continue to keep me pushing forward in my career. And I hope you get a chance to do it as well.
Well said.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I just have a few closing remarks before everyone logs off for the evening. So once again, thank you to our panelists for giving up their evening to share their stories with us. Like I said, there was such diversity, such passion, such energy for what they do. And I truly hope that anyone considering a career in any area of education, I hope that this helps to give you some guidance. I want to thank our partner school divisions that we work with, Greater Saskatoon Catholic Schools, Saskatoon Public Schools, Prairie Spirit School Division, and the Saskatoon Tribal Council. And thank you to my colleague, Stacy's here on the call with us tonight, but we have some of my other colleagues in the background as well, and helping with tech support, and all of these events wouldn't be able to happen if it wasn't for the amazing team at the SIEC. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and took part in our event this evening. We are so happy to be able to connect with students across the province. I know COVID hasn't brought a lot of positives, but the one thing is being able to share this information with students across the province. So thank you for tuning in. And please give us some feedback. We always love to hear from you, and we love to know what you enjoyed and what we can do better moving forward. So on the screen, there is a QR code. You can give that a quick little scan, or else there is a URL that you can follow to provide some feedback. And we love prizes. So give us some feedback and you will have the opportunity to win a gift card. And so this month, our feature was public services, and public services is a really big sector, and education is just one small area. So head over to our website. Maybe you heard our event tonight and you thought maybe education isn't for you, or you're still undecided, then check out all of the other resources we have available. In public services, that also covers emergency services. So last year we did a feature with fire and paramedic. We did a feature with police and RCMP. We have an interview with a Saskatoon City police officer sharing their career journey. So be sure to head over to our website and check that out. And we also have some post-secondary information for you as well from the College of Education. If you are interested in the Early Childhood Education program at Sask Polytech, we have an interview with a representative from there, as well as the paramedic program at Sask Poly and fire and emergency services at Lakeland College. And every month we feature a different sector. And so this month was public services. We've already highlighted a number of different sectors throughout the year, and all of our events are recorded. So if you want to go back and learn more about a career in a particular area, be sure to head over to our website and learn more. And lastly, the best way to stay up to date with all things SIEC is to follow us on our social media. So be sure to give us a follow, and we hope to see you at some events in the future.